Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. I want to start off by saying thank you again for all the views, comments, and likes on my last couple videos. It really does mean a lot to me, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more content, and just thank you again. In my last couple videos, I've gone over how to play aggro, how to play casual control, and how to be that guy at the commander table. But today, I wanted to talk about the way that you could argue EDH was intended to be played. Back in the day when Elder Dragon Highlander was 4 friends sitting around a table, you just picked out a legendary creature from the most recent standard set, and then you jam all the biggest, coolest cards you have in your collection into those colors. EDH was a format where you would make it to turn 8, 9, or 10, and get to do crazy things. A format you didn't have to worry about playing on a curve or securing a turn 4 win. You were sitting around with your friends playing big, flashy, dumb spells that never would resolve outside of EDH. So in today's video, we're going back to the roots of Commander. That's right, we're going to talk about how to play Battle Cruiser in EDH. Channel Fireball defines Battle Cruiser Magic as a deck that goes big and plays a lot of big, flashy win conditions. These decks are more focused on playing powerful bombs rather than playing the most efficient spells. Over the years, as the Commander format has really become a mainstay and a supported format by Wizards of the Coast, Battle Cruiser Magic has seemingly started to be phased out in EDH. Now, when I say that, I'm not meaning that big flashy spells are no longer played in Commander, because at the heart of the format, that's really the whole point. To play spells that you would never be able to cast in Standard. But the true Battle Cruiser strategy has changed. With more mana dorks, more ramp spells, and more mana producing artifacts, and a massive push for cards that create treasure tokens. Yeah, I'm looking at you, Dockside Extortionist and Smothering Tithe. If you're feeling pressured to add in smaller creatures or cast cheaper spells because the format of EDH is generally speeding up, then I'm here to tell you how you can still play big flashy spells you love without lowering the mana cost of your deck. Tip number 1, ramp. The most important thing for our Battle Cruiser strategy is going to be mana ramp. This is probably an area of focus for you as a Commander deck builder, but I'm here to reinforce the fact that ramp will be your most important area of a Battle Cruiser deck. Back in the day, our ramp spells were a fraction of what they were today. I can remember Kodama's Reach, Cultivate, and Chromatic Lantern and Gilded Lotus were the kings of color fixing, and at one point those were the only type of mana ramp that we put in our decks. Today we have access to a multitude of amazing ramp, like any of the 2 mana color producing mana rocks, mana dorks out the wazoo, and a lot more land finding spells that keep rolling out. Ramp cards that I recommend for playing in your Battle Cruiser deck would be the Artifact section of Thran Dynamo, any color producing Signet or Talisman, Everflowing Chalice, Gilded Lotus, Basalt Monolith, Commander Sphere, or Dreamstone Hedron. These cards are going to be able to go into any of your decks, things like Gilded Lotus that are 5 mana that almost seem out of place in today's fast-paced EDH, but it's a 5 mana rock that gives you 3 colored mana of any one color. It seems like a good return to me. Now, best cards that are going to find you extra lands, we're going to start off with the best ramping color, which would be green. I'm not going to mention cards I talked about before like Cultivate or Kodama's Reach. We're going to start off with Rampant Growth, Farseek, Skyshroud Claim, Migration Path, Nature's Lore, 3 Visits, and Harrow. For all my green players, you probably already know all of these cards. They're amazing, they'll find you those extra lands. Some are 2 mana, some are 3. Skyshroud Claim being one of my favorites is 4. They get you those extra lands and they push you to later turns earlier in the game. But for all my non-green players, these cards will also grab extra lands with some sort of workaround. Things like Knight of the White Orchid, Burnist Heart, Deep Gnome Terramancer, Boreas Charger, and Keeper of the Accord, which has become one of my favorites to include in my non-green decks. Unfortunately, for things like Deep Gnome Terramancer, Boreas Charger, Keeper of the Accord, you're going to be in white, but arguably, that is one of the colors that needs these mana fixers. Certain mana dorks that I recommend would be Circle of Dreams Druid, Bloom Tender, Birds of Paradise, Incubation Druid, Gyre Sage, Llanowar Elves, or any other mono-green producing dork, Shaman of Forgotten Ways, and Somberwald Sage for those creature-heavy decks. Now again, many of you are probably familiar with all of these cards that I've just suggested, but I just wanted to remind you that they exist and that you can throw them in a deck and still have fun with them. Even in some of my 3-color decks, I like to include Llanowar Elves, as they're just a cheap way to get down a creature early to continue to ramp. If you play a Llanowar Elves on turn 1, with a green mana and it produces green, but then you get another color, you have another ramp spell in your hand, you'll have 3 mana on turn 2 that you can then pile into another ramp spell to get even further ahead. So I know that Llanowar Elves only producing a green mana may seem odd in 3-color decks, but trust me, I like to run it, and I think you'll find that you like to run it too when you hit it on turn 1. Tip number 2, be patient and make sure to play your big stuff. Now that we have our ramp section covered, we need to focus on what comes off of the ramp, the big stuff. Battlecruiser is about ramping past the norm of the curve. We ramped on our turns maybe 2 through 4, and now when it gets back to us, we are technically on turns 6 through 8, while everyone else was still single spelling. So if we ramped on turn 2 and turn 3, we untap on turn 4, and now we have access to hopefully 6 to 8 mana, depending on our land drops, if we've played extra lands, or mana producing artifacts. So while everyone else is still setting up their board and playing an efficient blocker, we just went right to our end game. As the Battlecruiser player, you need to be comfortable with taking some hits early, because you might only have out a mana dork, or you just ramped while others are getting down early creatures. Remember, you have 40 life, and really shouldn't start to get worried about your life total just yet. And besides, we have plans to start casting big spells where to disincentivize other players from continuing to lower our life total. Stay calm, stay on the ramp path. Once you're able to cast multiple spells in a turn, you're going to be just fine. This should also go without saying, but we're playing Battlecruiser, and you should not feel bad if you end up casting a 6 to 8 mana spell earlier in the game. You might feel a tad unfair to have a big effect or a creature out much earlier than your opponents, but hey, that's the whole reason you're playing Battlecruiser, right? You don't wait to throw down your big spells, you want to get those out as soon as possible to start having an immediate effect on the game and start taking over. Tip number 3, make sure you can end the game. Again, this tip may seem like a no-brainer, but trust me, if you focus on cramming ramp, removal, and your favorite big spells into a deck, you may forget the section where you plan on winning. Maybe you like combos, and trust me, there are hundreds of ways to do that with creatures and spells and magic, but that really isn't my playstyle. Playing Battlecruiser, we will have access to a lot of mana, hopefully, so I would make sure to include alongside your big spells and your creatures a way to either deal a massive amount of damage or give things keywords like haste, trample, or flying. Some of my favorite things to do in Commander is to have a big board and then cast spells like Craterhoof Behemoth, Overrun, Triumph of the Horde, Beastmaster's Ascension for all my green players. But for those of us who don't have access to green spells, I have found spells to be super helpful that are Archetype of Imagination, Crash Through, and Dragon Throne of Tarkir. So these spells are going to make sure to give us that overrun effect. Archetype of Imagination being one of my favorites, gives everything flying and no one else can have anything that's flying. So if it has flying, it loses it. Crash Through is a 1 mana red cantrip that draws a card and gives all your creatures trample. So you don't need an effect like Beastmaster's Ascension to give things trample, you have a 1 mana red spell that does that. And Dragon Throne of Tarkir is a little odd as it's an equipment that's going to attach onto a creature, and when that creature taps, it's going to give everything trample. It's still kind of a funny workaround, but again, the Dragon Throne can be in any deck, so I included it here. Non-green spells that I love to cast to endgames with a lot of mana include things such as Insurrection, Mob Rule, and a new one that I have found out that is amazing in those blue Spellslinger decks would be Candlekeep Inspiration. If all you're doing is throwing down big, powerful creatures and hoping you somehow find a way to win with all your effects or through combat damage, you're just going to drag out the game into its slogfest. Try to put some more interaction into your deck and synergize with your powerful creatures or effects to end the game in an effective manner that doesn't involve just hoping that you can find a way to get combat damage through to 3 other people. Tip number 4, understand your deck before you play it. We've all been there, right? Someone sits down across from us and claims they just built a really cool deck, and they're really excited to play it. They cast some spell and they need to tutor for a land or a creature, and they spend an extra 5 minutes just looking through all of their cards before finally deciding on one. Maybe this is just me, but I like to know what my cards do, and I like to know what I want to search for before I cast something. I want to respect everyone else's time at the commander table, and I also want to try and fit in multiple games, so I don't want to be the guy holding up everyone else's turn. We will most likely be playing a lot of land ramp and creature tutors to find our stuff. Knowing what you want or need ahead of time will help you continue to play the game and not to slow down the pace. Speaking about searching through your deck, this is the perfect time to talk about a very important aspect of Battlecruiser deck, tutors. Now everyone is probably either rolling their eyes or getting really excited. Tutors have a lot of people divided in EDH. Let's just get the two obvious ones out of the way. Demonic Tutor and Vampiric Tutor. Yes, they're good, and if you're in black and you can't afford them, and like to grab any card in your deck, go ahead and play them. But now onto the more battlecruiser style of creature tutors that I would recommend for your deck. Things like Recruiter of the Guard or Imperial Recruiter I've found to be insanely effective at grabbing those very impactful, low power creatures. In green we have a multitude of things, but some of my favorites in the big mana section would be Shared Summons, Protein Hulk, Tooth and Nail, and I just threw in Worldly Tutor because it's so effective. The multicolored creature tutors are going to be Jared's Orders and Eladamri's Call. Eladamri's Call is great because it's cheap, it's at instant speed, and it goes right to your hand. You do have to be playing green-white though. And personally, I love Jared's Orders. It's 4 mana, so it's a little on the expensive side, so it's 2 and Golgari, a black and a green. But you tutor 1 creature to your hand and 1 tutor to your graveyard. Now this is insanely effective because it's almost like you're putting 2 creatures into your hand if you're playing a graveyard-based deck. You can make sure to pack in some reanimation, you get 1 to your hand, and then 1 you can get out cheaper for later. Just a warning that tutors will make your decks more powerful, as each instance of a tutor will be like having a second copy of any given card in your deck. Tutors are awesome because it will make your deck more consistent, but they will also make your deck very linear because you will know what you need to get when you need to get it. If you want to play your battlecruiser deck at a somewhat lower power, I would recommend replacing your tutor effects with more card draw effects. But in my opinion, you're already playing battlecruiser and tutors are just fine, but it's up to you on how many, if any, you end up running. Tip number 5, remember to have fun. The main place of battlecruiser and commander is to play spells that you think are cool. This is the root and the true identity of our format. If you play spells because you like them, not because they are, quote, the best or they win games more easily. A lot of people have pet cards that they love to throw in any deck that can run them, and I respect that decision so much. It is awesome to see someone cast a spell that they love because they love it, not because it's efficient or good in the format. I'm not saying that your entire deck has to be jank, but remember to let loose and try and play some bigger, splashier cards that you might not play in your more focused decks. To further iterate what I'm trying to say with this tip would be a spell like Spell Swindle. 5 mana, 3 colorless blue, counter a spell and make that many treasures based on the mana cost. Ugh, why don't you just use Mana Drain? It's cheaper. Spell Swindle? Ew. Why don't you just use Force of Will or Fierce Guardianship? I would never pay mana for my counter spells. And this is the kind of stuff that I mean. Yeah, clearly Mana Drain and Force of Will are, quote, better than Spell Swindle, but maybe I have an artifact-based deck, and making treasures gives me a better payoff down the road. Maybe I love the art of Spell Swindle. Maybe I pulled a foil promo at a pre-release and I just think the card's really cool. There are so many other factors that go into certain cards than just getting the best, most efficient effect. Play cards you love to play, not because they are the most efficient. Well, and I think that does it for my 5 tips to playing Battlecruiser in EDH. Now let's take some time and go over some awesome Battlecruiser commanders. First up on this list is Maelstrom Wanderer. Now some of you may be groaning as I mention this commander, but come on, it's 8 mana. It's 5 and Timur, blue, red, and green for a 7/5 elemental. Creatures you control have haste, and it has double cascade. So when you cast this spell, you exile cards from the top of your library until you exile a non-land card that costs less. You may play that card without paying its mana cost, and you put the exiled cards on the bottom in a random order. Maelstrom Wanderer probably has a reputation of being kind of like a combo commander. You get his cost down, you cast him for cheap, but then he still cascades into huge spells. And usually with decks like Maelstrom Wanderer or Yidris the Maelstrom Wielder, you put effects in your deck that will only cascade into certain cards. So when you hit a cascade, it's only going to get out a combo piece. That's not really the style of deck I'm talking about here. The Maelstrom Wanderer is almost perfect for the deck strategy that we're trying to go with Battlecruiser. He's big, he's expensive, he has a flashy effect, he gives all your creatures haste, which is a completely underrated ability in Commander. He's perfect. He's a 7/5, he double cascades, so you cast him and you get 2 additional spells, and he gives everything haste. The Maelstrom Wanderer is a Battlecruiser deck's dream. The next card I want to talk about is Mael of the Anima. Now, Mael kind of goes against what I was saying with play big flashy spells. Mael is only 3 mana, Naya being red, green, and white for a 2/3 elf shaman. Mael's only ability is you pay 6 mana, 3 in Naya just like her cost, and tap her. Look at the top 5 cards of your library, and you may put a creature card with power 5 or greater from among them onto the battlefield. Put the rest on the bottom of your library in any order. Mael's gonna come down. She's cheap. She needs to tap to do her thing. We need 6 mana, but then we get a free creature out of it. I don't know what sounds more battlecruiser than just playing huge creatures for 6 mana. Next up, I want to talk about Atla Palani, Nest Tender. Atla Palani is another Naya commander, a 2/3 human shaman for 4 mana, 1 colorless and Naya, red, green, and white. You pay 2 mana and you tap Atla Palani and you create a 0/1 green egg creature token with Defender, so we can only block with it. Whenever an egg you control dies, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card. Put that card onto the battlefield and the rest at the bottom of your library, in a random order. Now Atla functions a lot like Mael, except with Atla, we need an egg, so we can play eggs in Commander, which is a super weird creature type, but we can do it. When an egg dies, we get a creature for free. So we're gonna load our deck up with eggs and huge creatures. So Atla Palani is going to either create an egg or we're gonna cast an egg, it's gonna die, and we're gonna turn it into a huge beater to affect the game. The next commander I want to talk about is Nera, Wild Mage. For 4 and Izzet, so blue and a red, you get a 2/7 human elf shaman. Whenever you cast a spell, you may put it on the bottom of its owner's library. So if we cast our opponent's spells, this would also work. If you do, reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a non-land card. You may cast that card without paying its mana cost. Then put the rest at the bottom of your library in a random order. This ability only triggers once each turn. Nera is really interesting because it's a lot like the Maelstrom Wanderer, Atla, or Mael. This weird cascade, you don't get what you cast, you put it at the bottom, and then you cast something else. This is almost the pure definition of chaos magic. We're gonna put some cheap spells into our deck to make sure that we can cast them, and then we're gonna put those on the bottom and hope that we get to cascade into a bigger spell. Nera is just fun. She's low power, high toughness, she's 6 mana. You're in Izzet, so you're gonna have to run a lot of artifact ramp, but she just sounds like this fun, quirky commander where you're gonna put in low spells and big spells into the same deck, and you're just gonna see what happens. The next card I want to talk about is Ynet, Cryptic Sovereign. So for 2 and Esper, white, blue, and black, you get a 3/5 Sphinx with Flying, Vigilance, and Menace. A lot of keywords. Whenever Ynet Cryptic Sovereign attacks, you reveal the top card of your library. If that card's converted mana cost is odd, you may cast it without paying its mana cost, otherwise draw a card. So Ynet is either going to draw us a card if we flip a land, but most likely every single spell in this deck is going to be an odd mana cost. So whatever Ynet reveals, we're going to be able to cast. Again, this is just kind of the definition of like a silly, fun deck that we're just going to throw in cool, odd mana costed cards. Ynet will flip on attack, and we'll just get to start casting multi-spells a turn without paying their mana cost. The last commander I want to talk about is Belby, the Corrupted Overseer. And again, this kind of goes against the battlecruiser theme that I've been talking about of big flashy spells, as Belby is only 2 mana, a black and a green, for a 2/2 zombie elf. At the beginning of each player's post-combat main phase, that player adds 2 colorless mana for each of your opponents who lost life this turn. Belby's interesting because she does give this effect to our opponents, but we can use that to our own leverage, as we get to give our opponents mana, we get to claim that we're helping them, but then we are going to make the most use out of our mana. So we're probably going to include things that make everybody lose life. We're going to get that colorless mana for each of our opponents who lost life. We're going to use that mana to then cast our big creatures. So we can either throw that into a creature with a big mana cost and then we pay the colored, or we can include a lot of artifacts into this deck and make sure that we can start multi-spelling once we gain that 6 additional mana as early as turn 3. Our opponents probably won't make as much use of this, as they'll probably end up going to combat to try and deal that damage, or making deals with other people to hit them to get that colored mana or colorless mana, where we are going to make sure to include draining effects for the table, and then we'll make sure to get 6 colorless every single time. And I think that about does it for this video. Again, thank you for watching. Please make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. I'd love to hear your favorite battlecruiser commanders. My name is Azrain, and I have been your friendly neighborhood blue mage. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you next time.